Hello viewers, welcome to the channel. It finally happened, and in my hands I have not just a Space Marine, a hero, a master or some Primarch, but Titus himself. And also in a complete edition, with Joytoy called a collector's one. This is far not his first review, but it will definitely be the most complete, because Titus is the beginning of a new chapter in the production of Joytoy Warhammer action figures. And despite the fact that his first version was released more than half a year ago, the figure is still in demand, desired by many fans, especially after the update, and in my personal opinion, still not shown in detail. Therefore, as usual, I prepared examples of posing, display, analysis of the visual, and more than 30 frames of comparisons. I haven't done so much for any figure before. Titus' visual is essentially an Ultramarine Primaris officer. We've already looked at such warriors. A white right knee with the coat of arms, a skull with the laurel branch on the left shin. But unlike any other figure, there are scuffs and even traces of blood. Most likely Tyrannid blood. This is one of the innovations presented only in the collector's edition. A purity seal on the side. The sole is ripped. The rear armor plates of the shin are standard. They can be easily removed to switch on jump ones. The only difference of which is that they have stabilizer engines like in a power backpack. On the belt hangs a white cloth with splashes of blood. Do not confuse it with the tabard. The belt itself is decorated with the golden skull with a halo. An amulet with the relic's hands next to it. A side plate for thigh protection. Again, fabric for pathos, a couple of beautiful pouch pockets, one more armor plate and a pouch. All pouches are removable, but not the relic in the belt, which is unusual because all the other Space Marines have the amulet attached with the ball joint. Here it is completely rolled into the belt. The chest and waist armor are typical, this is Mark 10. The Aquila is decorated with the horseshoe for luck, which is simply the coat of arms of the chapter. On the forearms there are cool traces of blood. The pauldron on the left is standard. There are also a couple of drops of blood. The coat of arms of the Ultramarines, and a very beautiful border with the pattern of the small letter U. On the right forearm there is a chain on which hangs the amulet with the emblem of the Inquisition. The right shoulder part is a style, the calling card of Lieutenant Titus, two purity seals, a ribbon with the inscription Ultra, a beautifully painted skull in red flesh, looks great. The backpack is standard, but only for new Primaris figures. There is an emblem of the chapter with a skull. It differs from the backpacks for the Mark 10 of all generation figures, not only in its advanced painting, but also in the size of its lower part. It is larger. By the way, there is a part in the middle that moves a little, I don't know if it should be so. The alternative jump pack is completely basic, except that scuff are added to the general style of painting. In terms of size, it is absolutely the same, and the detailing of the flap is even simpler than that of a regular figure. The face is done averagely, not a caricature, but far from perfect. There are pins on the forehead and scars on the face. The eyes are shiny, the hair is in order, but the sculpt as a whole could be better, although from a short distance Titus is easily recognizable. It is obvious that Joytoy did not invest much in the face, because they invested a lot in the helmet. Visually it is a simple lieutenant's helmet with the red and white stripes, and a skull on the forehead. If you lightly hit it, the light up function in the lenses will be activated for 30 seconds. This is cool, but I'm annoyed by the need to hit Titus on the head. On a regular basis this is guaranteed to spoil the paint. But the thing is that Joytoy writes so in the instructions. Tap the helmet so that the eyes light up. This is the switching mechanism, no magnets or buttons. There is one more light mode, but it is not interesting. The top of the helmet can be removed. Inside there is a board with two LEDs installed in stock, so you don't need to buy it separately, but you need to buy a button battery, which is installed in the back side, and this whole structure should be installed in the head. An important point is that the instructions say what type of battery to use. CR927 for 3 volts. I'd like to share a couple of recommendations on its selection. Firstly, do not take batteries with a lower voltage, because there is an option for 1.5. And don't forget about spare ones. This can always come in handy, especially if you are collecting new Ultramarines from the game, because they all have a light up option. The set also includes 4 interchangeable hands. These are fists and basic reverse for gripping melee and ranged weapon. The only feature is painting with the blood effect. 2 holsters, empty one and with a pistol, which can be installed instead of pouches. By the way, I like how the scuffs are made at the corners. I haven't seen such design in other figures. In total 5 grenades, a pair of frags suspended on the chain with the ability to attach to the belt, 1 crack grenade on the same chain, and 1 grenade of each type for issuing to the hand of the figure. A very cool addition which is not included in the first version of the figure. A bolt pistol looks like a regular Primaris pistol, but everything is known in comparison, so here is a regular pistol of the old Primaris, and we see that this one is a little larger, including the thickness of the handle, which is important. Inside the barrel itself, there's another part that creates a narrowing. Titus' pistol also has a removable magazine, and this is probably the smallest removable magazine in Joytoys that I have seen. The bolter also seems ordinary. When I tried to remove the magazine, I accidentally removed the drum part from above. I don't think this was planned because there is no option to install a sight there. The differences from the standard bolter of the old generations are obvious. The size was increased, a narrowing appeared in the barrel. The skull with the wing disappeared. The strap for hanging also gone. But most importantly, the thickness of the handle of the new weapon is less than the old one. That time Joytoy certainly went overboard. Which is why I didn't put this bolter on my first Primaris. It permanently stretches the figure's hand, having a handle twice as thick as a pistol. A melee weapon is a chainsword with the teeth covered in blood, also quite standard. It is noticeably larger than the standard old one. The interval between the teeth greatly increased. The color and sculpt of the handle have changed, although the painting of the skull in my case did not turn out very well, and this detail is definitely better on the old version. While these weapons were necessarily compared, because the first version of Titus was supplied with exactly the same set of weapons as the basic Primaris of the second generation, so it is an important thing. The articulation is actually standard for the Primaris. I have already described these movements many times. Hinges in the toes and knees, ball joints in the feet, ball joints and turns in the hips, waist, chest, neck, hands, butterfly joints in the shoulders, and hinges in the elbows. I only want to note that all the joints are very tight, while the fingers are quite soft. Of course, the updated articulated shoulder pads are in place, which make interaction with shoulders and arms much more comfortable, thanks to the ability to move to the side and the presence of a ball joint. The articulation of the backpack is standard. Well, Titus is a hero whose lore information probably doesn't make sense to tell, because this is a character whose story is developing right now, literally before our eyes in games and short films. His name is Dimetran Titus. He was a firstborn, became a Primaris, was an Ultramarine captain, became a prisoner, then a Black Shield of the Death Watch, an Ultramarine again with a demotion to Lieutenant, and then a recognized hero. But no matter how sharply his fate turned, he always remained a favorite of Calgar and Tigurius. That is, he had the support of the Ultramarine Light, in the person of 2 or 3 most influential leaders of the chapter. I think no one will be upset if I prefer to analyze the display capabilities with the helmet on, and Titus' display is quite basic, which is not surprising. Any stances for shooting from a bolter, including crouching and running. However, personally I was not used to setting poses for him, due to the fact that he has different proportions compared to the figures I'm used to work with, and it always seemed that he looked somehow wrong, especially when I had to move his huge legs, belt and torso, but it naturally became more pleasant to work with the arms. Grenades add fun and variability that is usually lacking in other figures, but I do not see anything special in the display with them. Alternative assembly also looks gorgeous, as does the pistol with the chainsword. However, at this moment I realized what is missing in the collector's edition, a stand for the flight display. It would seem such a simple inclusion, especially considering that they made new mods for weapons, but the flight stand was ignored. In general, Titus always gave me the impression of a heavy man with heavy steps. When I played first Space Marine game and went through the second on YouTube, or look at the secret level, he even rammed a carve there. However, the figure is not that heavy, about 130 grams, against 119 for the basic Primaris of the second generation. But their size differences doesn't look like 12 grams, especially considering that the helmet is a composite and there are more armor elements in general. The figure is made of a slightly different plastic, but this is not immediately noticeable. There's a small, I can even say in literal sense of the word, problem with the display of combat settings. Most of the scenes that Titus usually fights are already represented by Joytoy, and they are noticeably smaller than the opponent. The fight looks like a confrontation between a Primarch and a Space Marine. Essentially, the only opponents that can jump out against Titus and the new Space Marines are large Tyranid warriors, chosen Black Legionaries and Core Knights. But he hasn't crossed paths with the last two, so sometimes you have to try to make these Primaris close combat look adequate. Speaking of the adequacy, I have promised many times to make the most stuffy and large comparison of Titus dimensions, so get ready. I only have the Infiltrator and Phobos pattern from the first generation, but it seems to be the very first figure from Joytoy for Warhammer, so the comparison is more appropriate than ever. The difference in height is such as if it was the figure from McFarlane being compared. This is my personal very first figure from Joytoy, second generation Primaris. I also wouldn't say that they can look great together, only if you imagine that the little guy wears a Maximus pattern. Argarant is already the third generation. The hips have become larger. The resemblance to Titus is a maximum. There's even a wreath desired by many people. But in height it still doesn't work out. By the way, they have absolutely the same leg design, thanks to which you can absolutely say what gigantic shins Titus has, and thighs too. Blade guards could try to get closer to Titus dimensions, for example this captain. This is the biggest, as far as I know, nameless ultramarine warrior among the old releases. But even here the difference in height is very noticeable. Here's the firstborn veteran of the vanguard. It is quite possible that this scale is correct. The old Indomitus Terminator is equal to Titus in height, but the level of the location of their heads speaks for itself. The fact that Guilliman has an outdated scale and probably the proportions have already been confirmed, but this doesn't cancel that the first Joytoy Primarch is still a giant against the background of other figures. But still, probably Titus should be a little shorter against his background. What we have in the end is obvious. The difference in the height between previous generations of figures are acceptable, and do not affect the compatibility. The case of Titus is already the need to find some kind of compromise, because it is difficult not to notice the bull in the Ultramarine China shop. By the way, this bull have many common features with Agarante, various decorations, style, drawings, emulate, title. For me, the most noticeable difference was the advanced detailing of the collar. Now it has metal rings there, which not only noticeably change the visual of the neck area, but also limit mobility. It is curious that no one of his brothers had this before. Phobos guy certainly looks like a teenager against him. But I don't end with the comparisons here. Leonardo from Joytoy as an example of a really low character in the same 18 scale size. Scion, Sister of Battle. Is this a normal difference in size? Many will say yes, but I still doubt it. I can say the same about the Orc Commando. Joytoy should basically relaunch the wave of green boys. Thermogaunt in theory goes well with Titus, because they were most likely made for him. This is the same Leviathan. Skeleton from BFS. Skeleton from Joytoy. I am also not sure that these are now the correct dimensions. Although, considering that Joytoy had a small rollback in the growth of Primaris, probably yes. The third generation Red Corsair has no chance and absolutely different proportions. Grey Knight is a very important point. In theory, he is in correct scale, because he is not a Primaris. Purely, technically, all Grey Knights can still be considered relevant in their dimensions, and their growth should be compared with the Heresy figures. There is now also a dynamic for growing bigger. Commander Dante. I would say that he is now too small. But considering the new August announcement of Primaris from Joytoy, it turns out that it's rather Titus who is too big. The already outdated Maximus Pattern Son of Horus. The already outdated Iron Pattern Imperial Feast. With them, in theory, everything is fine and relevant. It is not fine with all the 40k Custodes. They should not be lower than Titus. The Terminator suit doesn't really save the situation. The guys' heads are on the same level. The only option here is again search for a compromise. The Chief of the Black Templars. It seems to me is a completely adequate scale for the firstborn captain. This guy will not cease to amaze me with his enormity. For a long time Ahriman was the largest non-Terminator Space Marine in Heresy line. Now he has been pushed aside by Exodus. That giant monster is definitely larger than the Terminators. But what's funny with Ahriman? He is bigger than Titus, he is broader in shoulders, he is taller overall, but the level of his head, or better to say, his neck, is lower than Titus. Nevertheless, Ahriman can pretend to be a Primaris. Already an outscaled Cataphracti. As I said more than a half a year ago, their heads are at almost the same level. The largest Cataphracti worn by a non-Primarch looks really massive and it's cool. It allows you to better appreciate what a rich variety of figure heights Joytoy currently has. Alpharius is an example of new Heresy Primarchs. Contemptor Dreadnought and Pew height exactly with his leg. Shadow Sun in her battlesuit is almost the same height as Titus, and that's very good. I think the scale is correct, which is also very nice. Skeletor by Mattel in 12 scale. Titus' legs are longer than his. Boss from Hasbro in 12 scale. This is how big the new Primaris from Space Marine 2. Basil in 1/1 scale. He didn't like the comparison, as well as the Titus figure itself, because Basil's collection of figures consists only of past generation Space Marines, and he likes stability. Let's move on to the conclusions. First of all, the idea that the new large figures can have their legs set in a wider stance, bent to the knees, and this will help them to get lost among the old ones doesn't work. They will still stand out. This is already a matter of changed proportions of the legs. Besides, as I said, working with them in terms of posing and display has to be a little different. I can't say that it is easy for me to accept such a change in scaling, having already a good collection. But Joytoy apparently decided that the Primaris need to roll back a little in height. So the Space Marine 2 line can remain unique with its large figures, glowing eyes and rich kits. And the main line for 40k will stabilize a bit after the huge Black Legionaries. The Titus figure itself is of course a must-have for fans of the game, for fans of the Ultramarines, but I wouldn't recommend starting a collection with him, because after all, Space Marine 2 figures do not reflect 100% of what Joytoy usually do, and can either raise expectations or seem too complicated, with all the hassle of lighting, small accessories and assembly options, because figures from other Warhammer lines do not have all of these. And the assembly varies at most only in choice of the head and weapons. Only Mephiston so far has stood out in this regard. If you want to get the heroes of the game, you have definitely take the collector's edition. There is nothing collectible in it, it is simple revision without rushing the release. I am sure that the figure was originally supposed to be like this, but Joytoy was in a hurry to release it as close to game as possible. Which is why now the 3 main characters have 2 versions. By the way, soon we'll also look at 2 of Titus comics in the game, but the advantages of the reissue of the December release are obvious. Additional accessories, new molds and LEDs that you don't need to look for and buy separately. Also, I really hope for a line of figures for the first part of Space Marine game. Especially, of course, I want to see Captain Titus. To me, he looked much cooler than the Lieutenant, and the orcs there are also quite interesting. I know that Joytoy doesn't exclude the possibility of such a release. This concludes the review. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.